Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by Steve-O from Celtic World Order. Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind, Steve-O. We've been planning this for a wee while, so it's great to finally see you. But you're the second, in fact, you're the third member of the Celtic World Order who I've spoken to.
Yep.
Tell us a wee bit about your show and how it's been going.
Well, firstly, thanks for sending the invite to have us on. Paddy, Joe, the guys would have loved to be here, but work got in the way, so I'm flying the flag. So thank you very much for having us. Yeah, we're new boys in the block, I suppose you could say. Celtic World Order was something I'd started up, but roughly now about 15 months in the can. Was making that big bold step to sort of want to go out and do it, a bit of apprehension. I probably should have started a lot earlier, but I had everything set up and I was just a wee bit apprehensive about pulling the trigger. But no, it was basically just born out of passion for talking about Celtic. I'd been on a previous podcast helping out, doing a wee bit here and there. And as things goes on, I think once you start to get a flavour for it, you really want to do it for yourself. I think there's a great sort of feeling of self-worth. If you're doing something for yourself, it's more rewarding than doing it elsewhere. And that's really what it was about. So I started it up myself, talking to one man and his dog, doing my first show. And then I managed to rope in a few mates and some friends to help us. And it's sort of been going not too bad, but slowly but steadily building. I think we're just over about the 1700 mark and across all our different platforms, maybe closer to 7. So it's slow but steady and we're enjoying it. And it's good to get to come along and collaborate with bigger podcasts that are well known like yourselves.
Collaboration's key though, eh? It really is. And I think that it's something that when you set up your own platform, your own channel, and you've got a fixed idea of how you want it to look and the kind of road you're going to take it down, and you're an individual in that respect, but coming to collaborate and have a collective with other like-minded Celtic supporters is great fun. And I think this is Acsom's a good way of doing that. So we've had a few of the guys coming on, and hopefully that can continue, and hopefully we can get a part 2 with the whole team.
No, that'd be great.
Coming into bad.
I'm sure they'd be absolutely up for it. Paddy was completely gutted. You got to speak to him, obviously, at the night with Tosh and Alan Stubbs, and he was absolutely gutted. But he'll be watching this, and I'm sure he'll be looking forward to that. But just to echo what he says, I mean, that was when I came in here and started the podcast. That was the sort of ethos that I was working off here. I know it sounds a wee bit cheesy, but it was the idea collaboration, not competition, because I think that my sort of experience, there's some sort of closed doors. You maybe reach out to people, you ask questions, and you'll either get replies or you won't get replies. And sometimes it feels, even you see the comments, there seems to be a wee bit of sort of like, not rivalry, but people have their favourites and they don't like that. But I'd rather think if people are taking the time to do these sort of podcasts, we're all Celtic fans, you might not fancy the way a show's run or who does it, but you've got to appreciate, you've got to respect people for doing it.
I know that there is a bit of need on it. It's unusual, I think, within the Celtic fan base, because I always go back to the time where it would be the summer holidays and you would see a set of green and white hoops and they were your ally.
Yeah.
But now, all these years later, now with online platforms and social media, a lot of people, they fall out. They actually fall out just because they've got a difference of opinion. But we're all Celtic supporters and it should always come back to that. We had the audacity the other day to talk about Rod Stewart at Glastonbury, and oh my God,
So
it is raging on. It's raging on, Steve-O.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, it's great, because I always say this, right? People say it's like talking to your pals in the pub, and I get that, I totally get it, but it reminds me more of being in a supporters bus.
Yeah.
Because living in Fife, coming to the games, coming through to Glasgow, the travel was as much of your day as the game. And it was, as a wee guy like myself, listening to some of the adult conversations. And honestly, they would curl your toes at times.
Maybe stuff you shouldn't have heard.
Absolutely, stuff I shouldn't have been listening to. But you were in there, so you were basically exposed to that. And I always remember coming home after the game, and it was almost like the two moods. There was that optimism of going to the game versus the disappointment at that time of coming home for the games. And reading my fanzines. I was into my fanzines, not the View. It was my Bible, that was my gospel. But you're in the back of the van, there's no lights on, and you're just basically doing that with the street lights to try and get, and you would read all this stuff about the Celtic board and all that. But where I'm going with that is that I always feel that Celtic fans, when it comes to media in all different forms, have always been good at it.
Yep.
So the fanzines, Celtic were ahead of the curve. The guys that were able to pull these fanzines together, and we're talking photocopied efforts to begin with, and then send them to the printers a few years down the line once they were established. But the writing was funny. That was the first thing. It was hilarious, right? And also, there's a fly in the room, incidentally, if anybody sees a fly attacking one of us. But secondly, very, very insightful and ahead of the curve. So I'm reading fanzines in the late 80s, early 90s, and they were telling you their vision for the club. And it transpired the way that they actually saw it. And a big part of that, I think, is when you're so involved in talking about Celtic every single day, you might come up with something that comes to fruition. It doesn't mean to say that you're a visionary. It's just that you're so involved in it. Was the fanzine scene, was that before your time?
No, I do remember Not the View specifically. A couple of them lying about the house, and as you say, they were all sort of wee tatty small books, probably not too dissimilar to the size of the book there you've got. But it was actually quite interesting you said that, because I'm a big collector of programmes and memorabilia and stuff, and I was actually flicking through it, and it was the Martin O'Neill is the heavy defeat of Rangers, with Sutton scoring early on, and I actually had the programme, I flipped around at the back, and on the reverse it's got a fanzine Boyzone. So on the back of the actual programme, there was you flipped it over and you could have, I guess it would have been by comparison, a diluted, watered down version. Of course, it's in the official publication, but I certainly had those lying about the house, what sort of my uncles and the likes, they would go to games, and my sister's partners and that, they could read them lying about. So I did read them, obviously a wee bit when I was much younger, only 40. So you'd read some of it and it mightn't make too much sense, but they were in and around there. But as I say, it's that Boyzone one, that was kind of funny, because I saw it in the back and I was like, I don't think, how long did that last? I'd actually like to know.
That's interesting, because it was a standalone fanzine as well. So the clubs obviously, brought them on board. And then they did the same thing with the Alternative View. Matt ran the Alternative View. He was also once a Tim, always a Tim, which looked very similar to the Not the View with the way it was set up, the cover. But the Alternative View ended up in the Celtic View. So they've tried the crossover from time to time, and obviously they've tried to bring fan media into press conferences and things like that. But in terms of media, my view on it, this is just my take on it. I think we're getting to a point where you've got the mainstream, you've got fan media, and at the moment they're almost like separated into two camps. As we move forward, as the success of a lot of fan media platforms increases, and there's a demise distribution of the mainstream, and trust. I think the trust is a big thing,
Of course.
of the mainstream. I think we just streamline it, and eventually there's just going to be media. It'll either be good or bad. You'll choose to watch it or ignore it. And it doesn't matter if it's something that was legacy, mainstream, or if it's new fan media. It's just, do you like it? Do you enjoy it? Do you trust the people that are actually speaking? And do they have an agenda? This was always a big thing. What's your agenda with the mainstream? And we always knew what it was. So interesting times, because it's completely, it's constantly evolving. And even in the 8 years we've done Acsom, I've seen it changing dramatically in that time, to the point where we eventually get the call from Celtic, where they said, come along to the media suite. We've got the new manager, Ange Postecoglou, and we want everybody to be there. That was, for me, that was a breakthrough, because that was a new regime in town, and that was Dom Mackay. And it was down to him that we got in the door.
And then Dom, where is he now?
Exactly. I know.
Was that because he was shaking our trees? Did he have too much forward-thinking ideas, maybe?
I find it interesting. One of these days, I think it will happen. There will be that interview, and he might explain what happened. But I do think that he's come in with new ideas, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And one of the ones that we were exposed to was the fact that he physically phoned us, and he would have done this with all the other fan media platforms at the time, and invited us in. So it wasn't just like a blanket email. He phoned you. He got your phone number. He phoned. You seen it coming through, and it was one of the generic Celtic numbers. It was either the last 4 digits, 1967 or 1888. What's this thing to do with season tickets? You answer the phone and it's the chief exec, which I thought was brilliant. But they invited us in, and we went, and it was a great experience. Ange Postecoglou being unveiled. Some people thought it was a great move, others didn't. Ange proved us that it was a brilliant move. It was a fantastic move.
And that's it. It's kind of funny you say that, because it's a real human touch that, listen to yourselves, listen to other platforms, listen to just fans in the stadium. The big point has always been made is there's this disconnect between the fan and those that run the club. And something like that would have been so refreshing, to get that call, to get that invite, to be sort of brought into the inner circle, if you will, and feeling valued. And I don't know how it is for you guys at this moment in time with that sort of thing, but that sort of hand in glove sort of feeling between the club and the fan media, it just seems a wee bit more distant now. It seems a wee bit more formal, whereas something like that would have been definitely kind of informal and like, well, this is great, you know, a lot more welcoming.
What I always do, Steve, is always compare things outside of the Scottish football bubble. So I look at what do Liverpool do with Anfield Wrap? What kind of access do these guys get? They get an incredible level of access. So when I spoke to Celtic, another time it gets to that conversation, I always say, well, in terms of Acsom and what we need, we want bespoke content. So if you imagine like the launch of a movie, and they'll have a junket somewhere in London,
Yeah.
and the movie star's sitting in this seat, and this seat is for, let's say, 30 different channels, and you all come in and get 3 minutes, and then they'll send you your file. At least you're getting your 3 minutes rather than the same 3 minutes that everybody else is getting. So I've always asked about bespoke stuff, you know, even the launch of the kit. What do you think? I know you're a big fan of Celtic kits, right?
Yep.
You're a bit of a collector. What do you think of this new third kit?
It's polarising, isn't it? It's one of those ones that I've saw the reaction and you either absolutely love it or you loathe it. Personally speaking, as you say, look, I'll be totally honest here. I'm a shill. I will buy it because I collect cats. I like to keep them. Will I run about wearing it? I'm not so sure. Some of them I've bought and I've just kept the tags on them. They just hang in the cupboard, as simple as that. What I would say is when we think back to, I call it the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles top, the reptile skin one.
Yep.
Funny that is the sort of best-selling kit in modern times. I think looking at it, all I'd say is, and you guys echoed it on your show, is holiday vibes. You know, that is going to be on every beach across Europe and beyond this summer. Starting from now, it is out. I think that looking at it, it's not the worst kit. I think it's better than the would-be or proposed black and sort of pinstripe kit that's supposedly going to be the away kit proper. It will sell. And why will it sell? It'll appeal to young people. You know, I can imagine folk that are in their teenage years or whatever, going to trendy places, Ibiza and all that kind of party atmosphere with the big shades on, and you know, it's very much summer vibes. I think it'll sell, and I think probably beyond sort of guys like you and I that are now a bit more traditional, to people, the casual abroad. And I think in terms of that, it's nailed on. Do I think it's great? I actually think it's a wee bit too close to home because it looks like a washed out hoops top.
It does look washed out, doesn't it? Like a pair of pyjamas inside out. Interesting though, just where you've been discussing that, I'm insular in my thought process. I've studied the jerseys and I think this should be an away colour. This should be, the hoops shouldn't be tarnished or messed about with. They mess about with them so that they're not clean hoops, like you say, that scaly effort, and it becomes a big seller. And I wonder how much AI plays a part, you know, in terms of selling trends globally with sports goods, what kind of colours that they use. I'm pretty sure they'll have data to say, no, this is going to sell beyond your wee tribe fans. That, let's be honest, in terms of a global fan base compared to this tribe of fans that you've got in this country, they're looking beyond that. So I think we'll be up against that, and the more traditional ones amongst us will like the kit that comes out in the March, which we never wear.
But that's the thing, is that you always get kits and people always get up in arms when you change it. You know, you remember back to the 93, 94, when they put there was less hoops on it. I think it was like 4 or 5, and the audacity to put the Umbro through it. It was like, oh my God, what are you doing? But then the one that came after that is universally loved with the Celtic writing and things like that through it. So I think when you've got the home shirt in particular, it's quite hard to change it. Now, we'll always be traditionalists. You'll see some of the fan concept ones and they're super plain and they look amazing. But you would also get annoyed if that came out every single season. You know, as a collector, and certainly as Adidas try to sell you something, you'd just go, well, it looks like the exact same top. What are you playing at?
When I was doing the book, Steve-o, right, I had to write 500 words on every jersey. So when it gets to the point where we start changing the home jersey every season, those 500 words were very difficult to find because, you know, there's a tiny little flash that was a wee bit different. And a funny story, actually, on Friday night we were doing a gig with Brian McClare, Peter Grant. Brian McClare is a one-off. He's unique. He's funny, he's intelligent, really, really dry sense of humour, but brilliant insight into the game, and he's got a real vision of how he thinks the game should be developed in this country. He drops my book, picks it up backstage because somebody was getting up to sign it, and he opens it, and the page that he opens it at is Love Street 86, right? And instantly he turns around to me and says, "You made a mistake." Honestly, it was like a scene out of Rain Man. Right? I was like, wait a minute, how can he do that? This has been through proofreading. It's been multi times it's been read by the editor. I've made wherever we made a mistake, and he pointed to the mistake, and he was right. And I'd made a mistake.
So what was it?
You know this? It was a Love Street kit. This is unforgivable, and I'm considering recalling every single copy.
Oh dear.
This is unforgivable. So it was talking. It was kind of giving you the antecedents of the game. We were leaning into Love Street. What Celtic had to do, what had to happen to Hearts, and it talks about the Hearts game being at home at Tynecastle. And we all know that's not the case. Now, I'm going to dig out my original manuscript here because I think the editor's changed that. I honestly think, because there's no way I would mess up. And Brian McClare liked that. He
Get a claim in, get it redone.
Oh, it needs a second edition. But on the jerseys, I always go on about my favourite jersey, and it's basically the era that I was introduced to Celtic, going to the games physically, and that's the Centenary home kit.
Yep.
What's your favourite jersey?
I really are torn, and I've done a wee sort of feature on that where I was talking about it. For me, the first top that I can vividly remember pictures of is the Centenary top. And there's actually kind of a bit of a funny story off that involving Derek White. I told that to Granny. I want to apologise to Derek at some stage, but loads of pictures of me in that top. But for me, I would probably have to say it would be the 95, the Scottish Cup winning. And the reason for that is that's the first real tangible piece of silverware that I can remember celebrating and watching. So I always associate the shirts with memories or and certain players or things like that. I've a very sort of visual history and memory process. And for me, it would be that one because we won the Scottish Cup, and as fate would have it, I was down watching down Coatbridge on top of the bus shelters, waving to the buses going by, and I get a scare. There was an Airdrie bus came by, Coatbridge to Airdrie is quite close. The guy banged on the windows, and I fell back. I put my arm down, and I broke my wrist and dislocated my elbow, and I had that top on. And I remember going to the hospital, and I was crying. I was full of morphine and whatever. And I always remember saying, "Don't cut my top off me." So they kept my mum said, "We'll buy you a new one." Took it off me and that. But that's probably my favourite top because it was the first time, obviously. Before that, with the League Cup, we lost, unfortunately. Paul McStay missing the penalty, which heartbreaking is one of my heroes growing up. Yeah. But that was the first time that I'd actually got to properly celebrate Celtic winning something and have memories of it. I'd went through that torrid time in primary school getting slagged off because your team were garbage, and he actually won something to be like. So that one for me, just for the memory alone, but it is a topper. But if I was to pick a personal one, probably the Centenary or the 85.
Yeah.
Yeah.
85 is a bit of a classic. And again, there's all these differences. There's wee changes, like the top that we wore in the Scottish Cup final, 1985, is slightly different from any other top we ever wore. And I explain all that in the book. This is where it gets really sad, Steve-o, and you go right down to the stitching. But that's interesting, 95 jersey, because I've got the same kind of memories of that. Having started going to the games in 87, thinking that we always won doubles and stuff like that, going to Hampden in the sun in 89 and smashing the treble. But it was 1995 before we actually saw another trophy coming in. Yep. And again, interestingly enough, we wore that Umbro, the big thick hooped Umbro top right up until the final. And then we wear the brand new strip for the very first time in the Scottish Cup final. And you're looking about Hampden that day, everybody's wearing the jersey. You know, it was one of their ones. And they had the collar, which was in vogue at the time, that you could put the collar up.
All hooped as well.
All hooped, yeah. And back in those days, when it came to the Celtic jerseys, if you like, the you know, when the commercial aspect kicked in, it was still in its early days back then. I mean, now with 4, 5, 6 jerseys and all the rest of it, it's out of control to the point where even a traditionalist has just accepted it.
I'm trying to think when was it. I want to say, was it 2008 to 10 was the last time we done a tour season. The Nike with the yellow with the V-neck, or what he calls it, the Tony Mowbray top, I think is, and which is strangely, when you mention tops, is one that I've got a real soft spot for. Terrible memories, but I love that top. But yeah, I think that the tops are.
Who do you think of when you think of that top? Which player?
Honestly, I would probably say Samaras.
Samaras.
Yes.
100%.
Aye.
100%. Georgios Samaras.
So I've got two of those. I've got two player issue ones. I've got with the white back. I've got Scott Browns and I've got Knackers in the collection. Just put it away. So,
with regards to the collection, I've just got to say, when I was doing the book, the people that actually collect jerseys, without them, I wouldn't have had a book, because I'm not a collector as such. But I was able to travel round to people's houses, and the collection was out. We had a mobile studio, and we took images. So if there's ever a second edition and we're needing any of your jerseys, I'll give you a shout. But absolutely, we can run down the process of jerseys that remind you of particular games. But after that, we win the Scottish Cup. Tommy Burns is the manager. It was a horrible season, actually, the Hampden season. And we beat Airdrie. Even the final wasn't great. Big Van Hooydonk scores, but it wasn't a great game. We come back to Celtic Park, and you're thinking to yourself, we're going to win the league because everything's set up. You know, we've got the new stadium. We started to buy some quality players.
Great side.
Massive signings. What's your memories of Tommy's side?
Again, it's one of those, I think that we always talk about that, the Celtic way. And obviously that was teams that I would watch, you know, from probably my best memories to start to come in from when I say about 6 or 7, you know, even in that sort of 92, and actually, first sort of game that I went to was, funnily enough, against Airdrie, where I used to stay with my cousin, stayed up in Gartley, and we snuck into Broomfield and under the turnstiles, and I got to see Celtic wearing the pinstripe black away. First time I got to see Celtic.
Beautiful strip.
I'm tremendous top, Frank McAvenny top as well, I was thinking of that one. But yeah, in terms of the Tommy side, that was my sort of real memory watching, sitting down, and fantastic side. And it's heartbreaking when you look at it. I felt that side deserves so much more. And again, it was a real transition period, but when you look through that team, you look at some of the absolute quality, you know, Paul McStay's pulling the strings, phenomenal player. Ben you add into the mix, Cadet, Van Hooydonk, Andy Tom, you know, Alan Stubbs coming in later on as well. Phenomenal players that Celtic had all across that. And it was just so heartbreaking. And I always feel that the George Cadet signing would have been the, you know, the game changer, as we all know. I think there was maybe 5-6 games that we were held off for. And when I spoke to like yourself, and I'm sure they've said it to you, speaking to Peter Grant about it, he says, if we had George Cadet, we would have won that league. And I just felt it was heartbreaking watching that, because particularly for a man like Tommy Burns, that the club means so much to him. And he was coming into Celtic, he turned us around, he was getting backed, he had his playing a lovely, attractive brand of football, but there was nothing to show for. And I think as well, we can say all we want about the board at the time with Fergus McCann in place. I felt that if he had been allowed to just get that little bit extra in there, that we would have been a level up. Because when you look at some of the positions and you look at some of the guys that were in the squad, I always felt that from middle to front we were fantastic. We were lacking a wee bit. And I will say it outright, a goalkeeper would have just made all the difference.
Theory on that, by the way. See that season you're talking about with Cadet, and it was proven that Jim Farry had deliberately delayed the registration, right? So we're not being paranoid, that was proven. He lost his job as a result of it. And you look at the amount of draws that we had that season, you think to yourself, if Cadet had played with his goal scoring record, all you would need to have done is turn a couple of the areas into wins. We win the league.
Totally.
That was Rangers' 8th. That was their 8th in a row, because the following season, Cadet has a great season, scores like 32 or something in the season, and that was their 9th. So that margin there is there for all to see, Steve-O, and it's not about being paranoid. That was people deliberately in the highest corridors of Scottish football preventing us.
And that's the thing, is we'll always see these things, and no matter what it is, you know, with all due respect, whatever you may think, people say, oh, you're paranoid, you're this or that. I always come back to that point and say, we as Celtic fans have real life proof, tangible, an actual thing that happened that showed a clear and deliberate bias against Celtic. So when we talk about other things, you know, let's just say, for example, the EBT thing, or, you know, overspending where you're in more debt than you are, things like that, and people question, say, why are these not getting looked at? Why are they not? Oh, you're just paranoid. It's all in your head. Or even the likes of Rangers going for so long when they never got a penalty conceded against them, and things like that. I'm sorry, that's a phenomenal run to go on. So particularly when you've got something that is real life and actually happened, you say, well, it happened then, what can happen now?
The big thing for me is institutional racism, for example. It exists elsewhere in the world. Institutional bias exists elsewhere in the world. So if you've got an institution like the SFA, right, and there's a culture within that institution where it's biased towards another team or against Celtic, then how do people find that so hard to fathom? It exists all over the world.
Of course it
There's
does.
been so many. And football and corruption go hand in hand, Steve.
Well, you don't need to look at what's happened with Turkey, for example, what's happened in Italy. It happens.
Yeah.
It's there, and it will be in sway of one side, usually favourable on one side to another. So listen, let's not kid ourselves on. Has it happened? Yes, it has. Could it still be happening? Yes, it could. But it'd be interesting. I mean, what's your thoughts on the new sort of the new look, if you will, with Willie Collum coming in? It's not perfect. I think it's going in the right direction, but I still think there's a lot of work to be done.
You mentioned earlier about the fact that, you know, one team goes for so long without conceding a penalty. And it's not just an anomaly. It's virtually impossible for that run to have happened. And then they change the head of referees and it doesn't happen. So, you know, this is just evidence-based. So you look at Collum, I thought he was a rotten ref. I thought he was terrible as a referee.
Yeah. He had a foul and he had a penalty once.
Oh, I remember that. Remember that. Back to the head stuff.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So what he's doing and what he's implementing, it's about transparency. So taking decisions and saying, like, let's look at that. We got that wrong. Brilliant. I welcome that. And then having done a wee bit of digging into what's happening next with the, let's say, the next wave of referees, there is a different culture being implemented there as well in relation to how they're going to approach the game. So it might take a while for us to see that with this new crop, if you like, of referees coming through. But it's got to be better than what it has been.
Well, it wouldn't be hard with it. And the thing as well is, I do like the way that things have been. We've got a bit of an accountability. Well, recently we've seen a chap lose his job because of bad decision making. And I just feel that maybe that's the level of fear, if you want to call it that referees need to, that you will be put under the magnifying glass. You will be, you know, laid out to view on the VAR review and things like that. So you better make sure that you're doing your job properly. And if that wee bit of fear to keep them on their toes is going to make the right decisions, then I'm all for that.
Where else in the world could you do your job incorrectly and badly for 10 years? Because that's what happened with Muir, right? You go back to even like that Inverness Carroll Thistle game. He's the guy. He's the guy. He can see the handball. He's looking right at it, right? And he decides that, nah, everything's fine. No problem. So, yeah, absolutely. Big changes. I'm going to go back to a point you made about a goalie, right? So I've got a theory on this. I've mentioned it a few times on Acsom, right? So we were up at the park the other week there. They were promoting the Newcastle game and they bring in Shay Given. Now, Shay Given's one of the guys. It's a big what-if story. So going into it, we were talking about what should we ask Shay Given? And I was like, just ask him the classic what-if scenario. So I've spoken to Pat Bonner about this, and he was obviously at that time talking about the 95 Cup final. He had been freed the previous summer by Lou McCarry. He went to the World Cup with Ireland in America, and he was the only guy who's, when the name title came up on the screen, you know, the graphics. The graphic comes up, Pat Bonner, unattached, free agent. He didn't have a team. And Burns was trying to get him to go to Kilmarnock as a free transfer. He was also going to try and take Charlie Nicholas to Kilmarnock, right? And you say, well, bringing in the experience, it would have been a good move for him. He gets the Celtic job, Tommy, and he says to Pat Bonner, no, I want you to come back. I need the experience. And he also done the same with Charlie. So Pat Bonner says to Tommy Burns, there's a young kid here and he's been freed, Shay Given. And it's a massive mistake.
Crazy to think of.
We cannot allow this to happen. So Pat Bonner had the foresight, right? I mean, he'd worked with a kid. He knew him from obviously back in Donegal. He knew the family network. He was like, we can't let this happen, you know? And what Shay spoke about on the day he was up at Parkhead was the fact that, I'm going to say the 92, was it 92? No, 93 New Year's Day game against Rangers. And that was the game where they beat us 4-2, right? And the Celtic fans were throwing Mars bars and money and coins at the Celtic board, and it was sack the board. It was all a chance. We got beat 4-2, but they were beating us 3-0 within 20 minutes. Horrible game of football. Charlie Nicholas and John Collins scored for Celtic to make it a wee bit more respectable, but it looked as though there was going to be a 5 or 6-0 thumping. And on the bench that day for Celtic was a 17-year-old Shay Given. So he was
in the fold.
He was in the fold. You know, it was like he was a backup that day to Pat Bonner. And he spoke about that at this press conference. So my theory is this. Tommy Burns is able to convince Shay Given to stay. Everything's different. Right? Now people go, but he was only young at the time. He was. But see that season at Hampden, Shay Given made his debut for Blackburn.
Yeah.
He makes his debut for Blackburn.
And that's the thing, I feel it would have made the difference. And again, we look at the goalkeepers in around that time. Pat Bonner, great historically as a goalkeeper, just okay, at the time. Gordon Marshall, personally, I couldn't handle Gordon Marshall, terrible. And then you look and you think even a young Stuart Kerr, they were never really, and you looked across Andy Gorham, at Rangers, and then the run that they had with goalkeepers. Yeah, that would have made the difference that season. And again, just to throw out another one, I still got to say, Seville, a goalkeeper.
Whenever we're doing these live events, and the second half of it is write down the questions from the audience, and we'll ask, whenever we have anybody from the Seville team, that question comes up. And they all love Rab. They love Big Rab.
It's got to be hard, isn't it? Because he's your pal, he's your colleague, but I wouldn't pin Seville on Rab, but I do think that at that time, if we had a class goalkeeper, it would have been a game changer.
Now, you were here at Barrows Art and Design for the night we did with Jackie, Tomo and Stan Petrov. And it was one of these nights, it might have been that night, somebody asked the question of Jackie, who was the best goalkeeper that you played with at Celtic? And he said Brotto.
Yes.
He said Brotto was the best goalie.
I've said that time and time again. I thought that Javier Brotto was a phenomenal goalkeeper. We all remember the absolute stinker. That was it, game over. There was no second chance for him. And I just felt that we were kind of in that phase. And we've seen it with managers, not just Martin O'Neill, we've seen it with managers. They have their go-to guys and they always, come back to them and give them another chance or give them another chance. I thought he was a phenomenal goalkeeper. I really, really did. And sometimes you've just got to give guys a chance, but I can understand in a position like goalkeeper, it's you don't really want to experiment too much with it.
See the obscure Celtic figures? I think they make for good interviews.
Yeah.
Right? And I did approach him. I found him on LinkedIn. Gary Neville, social media choice. I found him and I contacted him, got back to me. And he's now, he either manufactures or sells goalie gloves. That's what he does for a living. He's into the kind of sports industry. And he said he would, but obviously he's based in Spain. So one of these days we'll get the
and get him, find out exactly what's happening. Because it just looked as if it was a bad performance and straight into bin.
Aye.
Felt sorry for him.
Absolutely. And it takes us up to now though, because we're talking about situations where a goalie could have given you more success. I think the Tommy Burns years put a decent goalie in there and we win the league earlier.
Definitely.
And you then look at Seville, a lot of people reckon, and no disrespect to Big Rab, the guy's brilliant.
Yeah.
And I've seen the size of his hands and I'm not saying anything bad about him. But a lot of people reckon that we were that wee bit away from. And Martin O'Neill tried to bring in a goalie, and Magnus Hedman, he was on big wages.
The cat, because he was also looking from the fire, it was terrible.
Bayern Munich, that's all I can say. Bayern Munich. But now, it's almost like we've been spoilt for a period. If you forget about Barkas for a moment, we've been spoilt for a period. Going right back to Boric.
Yep.
We've had a great run of goalkeepers right up to Schmeichel. And the last memory we've got of Schmeichel was that cup final. It's a bit unfair, isn't it? Because he's been brilliant.
I know. We've been spoiled, and you always look back and it's quite hard. Even Craig Gordon, you think Craig Gordon was a right hard time. Yeah. But he was a good goalkeeper and he was terrible at saving penalties. But he was a right good goalkeeper and a good mainstay and a great servant. But we have been a wee bit spoiled there. And I think obviously when we had the change and we got in Joe Hart, bit of question marks about him. Undoubtedly his last season was absolutely phenomenal. The best that we've seen Joe Hart. But bringing in Schmeichel is a shrewd bit of business. I know a lot of people didn't want to invest of the age and but again, now bringing in Silasano is the follow-up behind him. He's under that learning tree we cast for Schmeichel, and he could only get better. And what I have seen him, I quite like what I've seen with Silasano. I think he looks like he's got all the attributes to be good, but I do think as well that in terms of the squad now, we still do need another goalkeeper in there. Obviously Casper's going to be the one going ahead, but as you said, in terms of that final, it was a little bit of very unfortunate. I felt sorry for him as well, but I also believe that we should have played Silasalo. He got us there, and again, maybe it's just sitting here as an armchair observer. Look at those penalties. Where did they go? Top corner, high, because he wasn't jumping there, and that's something so simple that I think that even we should have went bold and made the goalkeeper change for the penalties. If it was good enough for Louis van Gaal, he put on Krill to save penalties. Why not us do that?
And again, these are things that we try and talk about every nuance of Celtic, when you're doing it every day. And you do talk about the what ifs. Leading into that game, we even spoke about should he come back into the side? Because Sinisalo didn't do anything wrong. Going back to Brotto, it's like, should Sinisalo have been dropped? And there was definitely a train of thought where people said, yes, he should, because Casper's the number one. He comes back in, bags the experience. But going right to that final, having seen the goal that we lost, because we're not losing that game until that happens, right? And, you know, the OG from the goalie. At that point, I think it wouldn't have felt harsh to take him off.
No, but
when that extra time looked as though it was just going to play out into penalties, I don't think it would have. It would have been a tactical masterclass to have subbed him off.
It's a bold move. And again, you've all got to think of the manager's side, which is easy for us to sit here and make those comments. But as a manager, he's one of your trusted. He's vastly experienced, and I can understand how it might look in perception where we've suddenly lost the faith. You're pulling your goalkeeper. I think if we'd at least got, as I say, to the period where penalties were in view, to take him aside and say, listen, we know you want to play, but with the injury, they're probably going to try and exploit that. We're going to make the change here. And I think that would have really thrown off the game plan for the Aberdeen players. Oh my God, there's Sinisalo there. We are planning on planting in the top corner. It changes it, but nah, I think that it would have been a masterclass to do it. I felt sorry for Kasper Schmeichel, but as I said, in equal measure, I really did feel sorry for Sinisalo because he'd earned it. And as we well know, this season's coming in, Kasper Schmeichel will largely be the number one. So it's not as if he had to play in that game. I thought that should have been Sinisalo's moment in the sun.
And we'd be sitting here going on about the masterclass of Brendan Rodgers and the fact that he was a genius and everything else.
Absolutely.
Interestingly enough, Sinisalo spent some time at Ayr United. The goalkeeper that replaced him, also on loan at Ayr, was Ross Doohan. And he's come in as the number 3. What do you make of our business so far?
I don't want to be harsh on it. I think it's standard fare for this sort of early period for Celtic. You wouldn't be criticised for saying slightly underwhelming. You know, undoubtedly, Kieran Tierney coming in brings vast experience. He is an elite level player and he's in these pompies in his prime years. He's not coming back washed up and he levels us up. Again, we'll look at whoever may well come in to be the backup to him. Again, we're talking about that learning tree from him. Fantastic. I think it also gives us a really bona fide option of a formation change. Go to a proper back three with someone like Tierney there. Gives us options. In terms of Doohan, no disrespect to the guy, it is what it is. Am I going to see him play? Probably not. He can take over for the Baniac on the decks and the changing room probably. But then in terms of bringing in Osman, he's a guy that I think, yeah, on paper, he looks quite good. I see a lot of people saying he doesn't have experience. We had the comparisons to against Dembele, but the two things are different. You know, Dembele had 64, 65 games under for the first team, loads of goals, loads of assists. But he's playing in Premier League 2, and I think a lot of people really play down the level there. It's the best and brightest young talents from all over the globe pulled together by massive clubs playing against each other. The competitive level, the ability of those games will be huge, possibly better than some of the teams that we'll play against in our domestic league. So he's been thriving there. There's no reason why he can't kick on. Of course, the big question will be is can he handle the thing that you can't replicate in PL2, the crowds, the expectation and the atmospheres. But so far, it's standard fare. You get those sort of okay-ish, maybe slightly underwhelming, but I think they'll start to ramp up in the next week, 2 or so on. But I think we do need to get our business done properly. I heard you guys saying about, do we hold off and see how we go? This is good enough to qualify. Celtic need to do what they haven't done for a long time, or as much as I can ever remember. Get the business done with a view of, no, we will qualify for this. Because if you front load it, you give yourself the best chance to qualify. You also get the guys bedding in the squad first and foremost. But also, it should take care of the domestic stuff. It should make the domestic stuff that little bit more easier. And I heard today you guys were saying, oh, if we were to unfortunately drop down to the Europa League, we got a better squad. Can get a good crack at that.
Yeah, I know, and I understand how the business side of it works and the company side of it works, whereby they look at, but we're losing this amount in the Champions League. I get that, by the way, and I would always want to play in the Champions League. But you get a lot more beyond finance if you have that fairy tale run to the final of a European competition.
Of course.
Massively. Seville.
But this is the thing. Yeah, see, when you look at it from a marketing standpoint, obviously you want to be at the big table with the big boys, making the big money for your draws and your wins and qualifying. But look at the buy-in. see from alone the merchandising and everything that would go with that, if you had a very successful Europa League run, you wouldn't be far off what you could have made in the Champions League. Of course, listen, I always want to be in the Champions League, but I do think with the new system and you don't get that drop down, it is a wee bit harsh, because look at the draw that we got last season. The options were going to be Real Madrid or Bayern Munich. It was like you're asking if you wanted stabbed or shot, right? So, you know, you get to that, but you think, well, if we were to drop down and you saw some of the teams in the Europa League, you would have fancied yourself to a good crack at that.
Aye, without a doubt. You know that night where it was so close, agonisingly close, and you look at the scenes afterwards with Callum McGregor and the disappointment, because he realises how close we were to actually taking him to extra time that night. And we talk about margins all the time in football. We did not replace Kyogo in the January.
No.
Right? Now, we know that there was a huge drop-off. There was a different energy. I mean, you just need to look at the Scottish Cup final compared to the League Cup semi-final against the same opposition, night and day. I feel as though we were let down by the fact that we didn't get a replacement. Initially, you're like, right, Kyogo wants to leave. Brendan Rodgers has made that pretty clear in his interviews, right?
Yeah.
He's made it clear he wanted to leave. So you let him leave. Loved him. Thought he was brilliant in his time at Celtic. But he leaves. We don't replace him, though. And it's just sometimes the tiny margins, Steve.
Yeah, I think what frustrated me about that was, and it almost felt as if the manager was sort of reneging on what he was saying. He was coming out and saying, he was asked the question, well, you know, utilise Daiz Maeda through the middle. Well, he's an option, but he never really committed and said he wanted to do it. He always sounded as if he's going, no, we want to replace a striker with a striker. He kept on toeing that line, and then it never happened. Now, we were lucky, we landed on our feet, we got away with it, if you want to call it that. Daiz Maeda, phenomenal. We've seen a transformation where I think, looking into next season, he's earned the right to be the #1 striker through there. But we could have been doing with someone. And see, even if that was the likes of, what we've just signed there, like an Osmond, a guy who's got decent pedigree, but he is a striker. That's what we needed, because I don't know where you're at with the Adam Ida situation. Time will tell. I will cast my judgments on him after he's had that full pre-season and in a couple of games. And I've said I'll give him till the December period to really give my thoughts on him. But undoubtedly we did need something, because we started then, as you said, with the final, for example, we tried to move things about. We bring in Ida and play him because, well, let's play him, and we move Maeda. And when we moved him out to the left and we're trying to force the issue with Ida to get him up to speed, to get him firing, we were getting diminished returns out of Maeda. It was almost as if reverting back to that winger, it just wasn't working. And unfortunately, as we well know, it wasn't happening for Adam Ida. We just needed that fresh spark, something completely different. And I think that some of those more sticky, disappointing results, particularly the final, might not actually have happened. Because in that final, James Forrest, as soon as he came off, the game was over. We were again forcing the issue.
Yeah.
Looking for Forrest to turn the game.
It wasn't flowing the way that we had seen throughout the season. And then Maeda, of course, there's two moments of his season, a phenomenal season that he had when he's 1-on-1 against Rangers and against Aberdeen. And, you know, he fluffs his lines.
Unbelievable up to that point, how well it had been done. When he's charged through, I could have swore he was going to put it in. And I don't know why he just sort of fell back in there, didn't he? It was almost like he had a sort of identity crisis, but it was like the old Maeda came back.
Remember that, I remember the discussions around Maeda, divided opinion. Difficult now to understand how that could possibly happen after the season he's had. But again, I've said this time and time again, as a Celtic fan, it's been normalised that we sell our best asset, our biggest player. We've done it season on season for a while now. Obviously last season we lose Kyogo and Matt O'Reilly, and going right back to, you know, Edouard, Christie and Ayer. Every season we've lost a couple.
There's always been one.
There's always been players. Do you expect it to happen this time round? And if so, who do you think is going to leave?
I think it's a foregone conclusion. Now, come back to what he says about the transfer window. I think that Celtic need to put themselves in a strong position. I am reserved on my judgment at this moment in time, but I'm also quite accepting that there will be a big sale. I think the most likely candidate, let's be honest, is going to be Nicholas Kuhn, right? I think that goes without saying. That 15 million are there to RB. That will see if that's going to happen. If you'd asked me before then, I would have probably put my money on Hatate. I felt that for a period, he'd maybe hit his maximum at Celtic, and that was as good as it was ever going to get. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Big fan of the guy, but I think probably it's going to be Kuhn that's going to move on. But what I want to see Celtic do, we've got all these links that are flashing about, you know, like Sabala, Uriah Setter, etc. We need to get them, and see if we're serious about buying those guys, buy them right now and then release Kuhn. Whether you maybe want to try and keep Kuhn to have that strength and depth to try and get through the qualifier, make a gentleman's agreement, you will leave after that. Kind of what we did with Kyogo.
Absolutely.
Kept him about and done, do something like that. But we need to get the guys in early, integrated into squad, because it's twofold. One, it allows them to hit the ground running. It allows us to get up to speed and have the options, but it also strengthens our position when negotiating. Look at what happened to Adam Ida. Look at what happened to Arne Engels, for example. I think we should be spending those fees. But Engels at the start of the summer was valued in the pocket about 7 million. We then went and sold our key asset. And Augsburg are saying, well, you need him, don't you? The price goes up. And the same with Adam Ida. No deal in place. The fans are in love with him, want him. And Norwich are sitting going, well, you get something that you want. So for me, I think it's probably going to be Kuhn. But anybody that we want to buy, get them in before he goes. Otherwise, we'll end up paying over the odds.
Without a doubt. Yeah, and you can see that as fans. It's not even about us joining the dots and coming up with the wrong answer. It's pretty clear that that's the case. Paul Tisdale's obviously now in place as the football doctor. I don't know if you had the opportunity to see his presentation at the fans forum.
I didn't. Hopefully he's writing some prescriptions though, because we're overdue some.
Without a doubt. And again, I think we've been pretty patient with this, because we know that there was consultancy work going on prior to his appointment. And this is really a window where you can't say, you know, the responsibility of this window isn't on this guy. So you're looking forward to seeing how that changes and how we approach it differently as well. I'm going to bring up Ben Nygren, as we're calling him. Benjamin Nygren, 1.7 million quid, Swedish international, 23. That's a great bit of business on paper.
It's a steal. And again, it's funny when you look at the sort of viewpoint of some fans online. Oh, we're cheaping out. We're going to sell Nicholas Kuhn for 15 million. We're going to buy this guy's cheap. Well, no, like, what that is opportunistic. Because if this guy had a year on his contract, look at what was happening with Bal Krischer. They're wanting 5, if originally they're wanting 6 million, they're dropping that down. That would have been the same with Benjamin Nygren. He's a quality asset. He's a quality player. You're not getting in that Sweden squad if you've not got the ability. He's had great numbers when he was at Nordsjælland, so he's a very well-rounded player. Celtic have just been very, like same with Osmond, opportunistic. They've came in and they've been able to snag a deal. It's not cheaping out, it's snagging a deal, and I think he's a fantastic looking player. Is he a replacement for any of our wingers? Well, no, I don't think he is. I think he's more comfortable in the middle, maybe as a 10. And the one I've always compared him with, what I saw at least, he reminds me a lot of Chris Commons, where he was kind of maybe marketed as a winger, wasn't blessed with blistering speed, but he was very robust, could put himself about, great eye for a pass, and certainly with his numbers, knows what the back of the net is.
Chris Commons, I'm glad you brought him up. There was jerseys flying about on Friday night, and I always look at a jersey and say, that reminds me of. And it was the one with the split
7 hoops.
And I was like, that's Chris Commons. Where are we with Chris Commons? Because, I mean, see on the park as a player, brilliant. Fantastic signing. What was it, 300 grand for Derby?
Absolute steal. Chris Commons, a phenomenal player. And again, sometimes, I heard, as you say a couple of times, you've got to sometimes split the player from the personality. I don't know what it is, but there's been a couple of players that I seem to have left that have got their nose a wee bit out of joint and maybe throw a bit of unwarranted shade at the club. Chris Commons seemed to have just sort of went a wee bit crazy. His opinions on Celtic lately. It's
no longer up here, is he? I don't think he's based in Glasgow.
I think he might have went into hiding after some of the stuff that's been thrown out.
I was looking at, you know, the fact that he's the top goal scorer one season, scores over 30 goals. And then the Ronnie Deila era, that's where it kind of started to taper off for Chris Commons. And there was that infamous incident against Molde, where, you know, it just doesn't look good, does it? And you think, well, you might be having an issue with that individual, or maybe with Collins and Deila at that moment, but you're representing Celtic, of course, and the way that he threw the toys at the pram. And again, no, because we love the drama, Steve-O, but when you speak to people who were in the dressing room after that, and you're asking them, what happened in the dressing room? And you find out that actually the players kind of felt the same as us, as fans. It's like, that's out of order. You do not behave like that.
You've got to conduct yourself in a certain way. I think maybe I would question, say, is that simply down to the individual, or is that maybe what came before in terms of the culture? Because I always think that sort of dialer stage, that was maybe the last vestige of the lad culture kind of team. You know, you look around and you had guys like Charlie McGrew and the likes, and obviously Lenny and things like that, and you think, oh, maybe that there's going to be that sort of guy sort of culture, and then you've got somebody like John Collins that ever fit, disciplinarian coming in, you've got a young, exciting, I guess, coach coming in with sort of blue sky thinking, and these guys are like, that's not for me.
I know.
And I think that maybe it was a clash of personalities and it just boiled over. Maybe even thought that he was more valuable to the team and the club than he actually was.
You know, that's really interesting because it was a different culture. And you talk about when Ronnie Della comes in, he bans sugar from the kitchen. So if you want a cup of tea, no sugar. Just wee things like that, right? That's not what's kicked it off. It was the whole outlook of both him and his assistant, John Collins, who I've got a lot of time for as well. But again, he suffers from a lot of the Celtic fans going, oh, I don't like him because he left us in the lurch, he left for nothing, etc., etc. But the Chris Commons debate is an interesting one because there was that moment where he obviously apologised after it. You know, there's the official apology. But then when Brendan Rodgers comes in for season 1 under Brendan, Chris Commons isn't freed. He doesn't, you know, leave the football club. And all season, doesn't play. There was a short spell on loan at Hibs. I remember him scoring a free kick at Easter Road. But he just doesn't play. So it's almost as if, right, they've come up to that impasse, if you like, where the player's refusing to leave and the club aren't going to play you. And he never kicks another ball until it was one of the charity games at the end of the season. In fact, was it Larson's Legends?
Did they wheel him out?
It was Lubo's Legends and which one?
There's that many now. I think it was
Henrik's Heroes.
Henrik and the Lubo.
We played in that game and that was his farewell. You know, so since then, he then moves into punditry and that's fine. And you want your pundits to be honest. I mean, Chris Sutton can be brutally honest when it comes to Celtic as well.
Yeah.
But as I say, I'll go back to it. Where are we with Chris Commons? Because I tend to think more of Commons, the goal scorer. That's in that Celtic team that, you know, that we draw 3-each with Kilmarnock when we're 3-0 down at half time, and he scores that goal against Rangers in the 3-0 game. He was a great player for us.
He was, and he seems like, particularly when you look at his partner as well, they really bought in.
Totally.
Shane in particular really bought into the sort of Celtic culture
fans.
and the fans and everything else. Just as a really, really strange one. Says I was a big fan of Chris Commons and I will still have fond memories of him. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I thought a great player. I don't have any ill feeling towards the guy as a Celtic player. I just find it peculiar, as I says, that the route with the pass into the punditry and sort of some of his opinions and things like that. And I really can't get my head around it. Perhaps it was, as you said, that he was left in the cold under Brendan Rodgers. Maybe that's what could have been. It would be interesting to either hear from Brendan or even Chris Commons, if you know, he's a guy you could sit down and have a chat with and say, well, exactly did what happened there? Because there was no reason why he couldn't have been another phenomenal tool in our arsenal in that season. Just strange.
So you basically just said that he should be a guest on this show at some point.
I want to know. Yep, you get him, go and get him and let us know exactly what happened there, because I says where I'm at with him is it's just confusion. I don't really know what happened post Celtic with him.
I know, but there's a massive big naughty step, and there's a few ex-players on it.
Yeah,
and you just sometimes think that all it could take is a down to earth, heart to heart conversation about Celtic, and you might change people's minds. Because, like for example, Charlie Nicholas, absolute legendary first spell at the football club, coming through scoring 50 odd goals as the youngster in a season, and then he comes back when we were a bit rotten, but he still performs. He scores 25 goals in a season, almost gets back into the Scotland team. But when he leaves and he does the punditry, and he done that as a career after football, Celtic fans are not massive fans of Charlie. I think a Charlie Nicholas interview, I think a Chris Commons interview, Andy Walker, dare I say, I think these guys are interesting chats.
And that's the thing. These guys are polarising as well. For whatever reason, folk for whatever reason, they just don't take to them after what's came after their time at Celtic. Charlie Nicholas is the classic example, and of course Andy Walker. How many times you hear someone say, you would forget that he played for Celtic, with some of the comments. And I think maybe the likes of Walker and Charlie Nicholas, some of the comments, maybe even to an extent Chris Commons, some of the things and the negativity that have came out, it's almost do I think they necessarily believe it, or are they just trying to be dramatic to cause controversy? Probably. Then maybe look at the likes of Chris Sutton and how blunt he can be and think that's the way to make it, that's the way to get it.
You're right. I think they're constantly thinking about who am I going to upset. Do I upset people at the club, ex-fans, or am I going to be box office and give you a headline,
Yep.
and then I'll get asked back because they're all freelancers. They're not employed by Sky.
Yeah, if you go on and you're boring and you say nothing, you're just vanilla, then you're probably not get invited back. But if you drop a few wee grenades into them and it gets people talking, at one point, get them back in.
The traction. Sadly enough, it's more about the traction now than ever. If we go into next season then, and we're looking at the fact that we're on the back of 2 titles under Ange, 2 titles under Brendan, do you do this thing where you just start counting in a row? So we're going for 5 in a row.
I know, it's tough, isn't it? You don't want to get ahead of yourself. I think that we're in a strong position. Like every season, for as long as you can remember, Celtic are always going to the fan favourites. With the financial strength that we've got, if this summer is vital, and I know it is cliche, it's stating the obvious, Steve, this season will be decided on the transfer window, because the Rangers, who knows what's going to happen with them, but they can only get better. But it's important for us to not just stay one step ahead, but further. And if we do that, I think it should be a formality. But I think Brendan Rodgers needs to declare at one point what's going to happen, because I think we all need clarity as fans, and I dare say the players also need clarity for fans. But then again, it's on a knife edge. If he comes out and says, this is my last season, what does that mean for potential signings coming in? What does that mean for guys wanting to stay about? If he comes out and says, yeah, I'm staying on, I'm extending my time, then I think it's box office, everybody buys in. But we do need that clarity one way or another. And I think that could go a lot down to how the season pans out. Because if the players don't know, and we find ourselves what we did there in the sort of January onwards phase, where it's maybe a bit for performances maybe dipping and stuff, if they don't have that clarity with the manager, that could derail a lot. But as I say, I'm optimistic they will just crack on as we're doing. Even in January, it'll be a case where it won't even matter, because we'll still be well ahead.
You hope so. But you're right, every time he's been asked, it's been a politician's answer that he's given. I'm going to ask you then to remind everybody that's tuning in, Steve, where to find you as well, because in terms of Celtic media, I think it's very healthy. I think the quality's there. It goes right back to the fanzine days, and it exists right up to this moment. And it's about trying to break new ground, and collaboration for me is key to that. So where can everybody find you?
So our main platform is, like yourselves, is YouTube. So we're youtube.com/Celtic World Order Podcast. Pretty much that is there. We try to do as many shows. Obviously with the post season at the moment, close season, the summertime, it can be a wee bit sort of like pulling teeth, trying to come up with content, but we'll always try to get out once or twice a week during this period. That'll of course start to ramp up, but of course you want to catch up in the move. We're on Spotify, but they seem that the most popular things are TikTok, that Paddy runs. Folks seem to like that. I mean, I maybe sound a bit old and boring, but I don't even know what a TikTok is, but Paddy's been doing that. So you can get us on TikTok at Celtic World Order Pod, and our main social media is X at CWO Pod 1888. So plenty of ways to connect with us, and hopefully folk do that.
Yeah, and we're going to get the other guys on for episode 2, part 2 of the Celtic World Order. Well, all it's left for me to say is thanks very much for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.
Obviously, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind. Join us again at 6 o'clock next Friday, for this is Acsom.